Two 7-year-old twin girls in pink sweaters wandered through the snow-blanketed woods of Frosthaven, their stomachs aching from days of hunger. At their side padded Shadow, a black and tan German shepherd whose amber eyes never stopped scanning the trees. Then just beyond a cluster of frost-bitten pines they saw him, a soldier sprawled in the snow, his dark skin ashen, his uniform torn and soaked in blood. His lips moved, barely a whisper, but the words would burn into their memories forever. Don't trust Victor Hale. In that frozen moment, the girls didn't know their choice to stay would set in motion a storm of danger, betrayal, and a fight for survival no one could have imagined. Snow fell in steady silence over Frosthaven, layering the streets, rooftops, and bare trees in white. Inside a small wooden house at the town's edge, the cold lingered in the corners and seeped from the cracked window frames. Abigail and Amelia Carter, 7-year-old twin sisters with pale hair and pink sweaters faded from wear, sat at a worn table. Their breakfast stale bread was chewed without a word. Agnes Holloway, their aunt and guardian, hunched over a ledger, her thin gray blonde hair tied in a knot, eyes locked on columns of numbers. She rarely looked up. For her, every day was about stretching the government stipend as far as possible. She claimed feeding Shadow, the girl's black and tan German shepherd, was an expense she couldn't afford. Shadow lay at their feet, his amber eyes alert yet calm, ears twitching at every creak of the old floor. He was 5 years old, broad-shouldered, with a faint scar on his left ear, a remnant from a past winter. Once trained by their late mother, Edith Carter, to guard the bakery she owned, Shadow had become the girl's constant protector since her death. The house carried the scent of old wood and cold iron. Frosthaven in winter was a place of short days, quiet streets, and roofs bowed under snow. Abigail, older by minutes, was watchful and thoughtful, always gauging the mood in the room. Amelia, softer in nature, smiled more easily but had grown quieter over the last year. Both had memories of the hearthstone, their mother's bakery warmth from the ovens, the scent of cinnamon knots, and Edith's voice teaching them patience as they kneaded dough. Those days ended when the pandemic closed the shop, debts piled up, and Edith's weak heart gave out. Agnes took them in, but her care was obligation, not love. This morning the bread was dry and small in their hands. Shadow nudged Millie's knee, and Abigail quietly broke her crust to share with him. Agnes noticed but said nothing, simply reminding them of chores, fetch water from the river before the next snow. The twins bundled in their coats, boots, and mittens. Shadow waited at the door, tail low but ready. The wind bit as they stepped outside, snowflakes catching in their hair. The path to the river wound between snowbanks higher than their waists. Shadow trotted ahead, sometimes circling back to check on them. At the river, frozen in ridges and clear ice windows, they filled the pail, their breasts white in the air. On the walk back, Amelia asked if Abigail remembered the cinnamon knots. Abigail did she even remembered giving the first bite to Shadow once. The memory made them both smile briefly before the cold returned their focus to the path. Back home, Agnes took the water and immediately assigned more chores, stacking kindling, wiping the frost from the windows. She returned to her ledger, flipping papers and occasionally glancing at Shadow with that same calculating look. By midday, the hunger in their stomachs sharpened. Abigail glanced at the window, seeing the fence line where snow piled high. She suggested to Agnes that they check for drifts to keep it from bowing, permission disguised as helpfulness. Agnes waved them off with, "Take the dog." The three slipped into the yard and along the fence until it became the edge of the woods. Frosthaven's forest in winter was hushed but watchful. Branches sagged with snow, and here and there, winter berries clung to bare stems. Shadow's nose found the first cluster, and the girls plucked them, filling mittened hands. They ate slowly, lips puckering at the tartness, saving one berry each for Shadow, who accepted with a polite lick of his nose. Beyond the tree line, the forest deepened into shadows. Abigail felt the air shift sap, ice, and something metallic making her glance farther in. Shadow stood still, one paw lifted, ears forward, gaze fixed beyond what they could see. After a moment, he shook the snow from his coat and herded them back toward the fence. When they returned, Agnes was on the back step, arms folded, breath misting in the cold. She looked them over but said only, "Hang up your coats." Inside, the lamp glowed against the early dusk. The girls worked quietly through the rest of the chores, shadow following like a silent shadow. The wind rattled the windows, whispering through the house. In that fragile light, the three of them, two children and a dog, sat close enough for their feet to find each other without thinking. Nothing had changed yet, but beyond the trees, something waited that soon would. The wind in Frosthaven's woods had its own voice, low and constant, threading between trunks, carrying scents and sounds from far away. Abigail, Amelia, and Shadow moved through the shallow path they had made beyond the fence line earlier that day, their breath clouding before them in soft bursts. The light had begun to pale toward evening, and snowflakes swirled in uneven gusts, settling on Shadow's dark coat like flecks of ash. The cold bit sharper the deeper they went, but Shadow's steady gait and occasional glance back kept the twins moving. Shadow was more alert than usual. His amber eyes flicked from the path to the dark spaces between the pines, nostrils flaring as if reading something written in scent rather than sight. Abigail noticed the way his tail held still, straight like a line drawn in caution. She tightened her mittened grip on Amelia's hand. "Stay close to him," she murmured, though Amelia was already hugging Shadow's flank. Then just beyond a bend where the snow lay untouched, Shadow stopped. His ears pricked forward, and his breath rose in slow, deliberate puffs. A faint shape broke the monotony of white under a leaning pine. A figure collapsed on its side, motionless except for a shallow rise and fall of the chest. The uniform was unmistakable, though tattered and darkened with a spreading stain of blood against the snow. His skin was deep brown, contrasting sharply with the pale drift beneath him, his hair cropped close, a jagged scar cutting across his temple and disappearing into the hairline. Marcus Reed was 38 years old, though in this moment he looked older, worn down by more than just the injury. Once a U.S. Army Staff Sergeant, he had served 2 tours overseas, known for his calm under fire and the way he carried his men's burdens without complaint. The scar at his temple came from shrapnel years before. He had refused evacuation then, choosing to finish the mission before seeking treatment. It was part of who he was. Endure first, recover later. Now his endurance had run to its edge. His lips parted, a whisper escaping that seemed to cost more breath than he could spare. "Don't. Trust." Victor Hale. Abigail froze for a heartbeat. Victor Hale meant nothing to her, yet the warning was etched with urgency. She glanced at Shadow, who had taken a slow step forward, sniffing at the air, his stance protective. Snow dusted Marcus's lashes and his gloved hand twitched weakly before falling still again. "Millie, go!" Abigail said, her voice tightening into command. "Find Mrs. Bennett. Bring her here. Tell her we need help right now." Amelia hesitated, looking between her sister and the soldier. "What about you?" "I'll stay. Shadow will stay too." "Go!" Amelia ran, her boots breaking through the crust of snow, vanishing down the path they had come. Shadow lowered his head toward Marcus, sniffing along the edges of the wound. Abigail dropped to her knees, the cold seeping through to her skin. The crimson on his coat was thick, sticky with cold. The snow around it was stained pink where it had melted and refrozen. She pulled off one mitten and dug into her coat pocket, finding the square of wool scarf she sometimes used to wrap Shadow's paw pads after long walks in ice. Her father had once shown her how to wrap a bandage after Shadow cut himself on a shard of ice near the old mill, tight enough to hold, loose enough to keep blood flowing. She remembered every motion. She pressed the scarf firmly against Marcus's side. He flinched at the contact, a soft groan rising in his throat, but his eyes remained closed. "You're going to be okay," she said, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. Shadow shifted position, standing where he could see both Abigail and the trees behind them. The woods felt different now, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to have paused. Then came a sound, a faint crunch of snow, slow and deliberate. Shadow's head snapped toward it, a deep growl rumbling low in his chest. Abigail followed his gaze and saw a figure partially hidden between 2 pines. The man wore a heavy black coat, hood pulled low over his brow, his posture still as if carved from the shadows themselves. His face was obscured, But even from this distance, she felt the weight of his gaze. The man didn't move closer. He only stood watching. Shadow's growl deepened, ears flat against his skull. Abigail's pulse quickened. She kept her hands steady on the makeshift bandage, refusing to look away from the stranger. A few long moments passed before the man stepped back, melting into the white and gray until nothing was left but trees. Amelia's voice broke the tension, calling out from the path. She burst into the small clearing, with a woman following close behind, a bulky olive canvas bag slung over her shoulder. Clara Bennett was in her mid-60s, tall and spare, with hair the color of fresh snow pinned neatly under a knit cap. She had once been an army nurse, and though she had retired years ago, her movements still carried the brisk efficiency of fieldwork. Her lined face softened as she knelt beside Marcus. "Good work, Abigail," Clara said without looking up. She peeled back Marcus's coat, eyes narrowing at the wound. "Deep, but we've got a chance." From her bag, she drew gauze, antiseptic, and a thick thermal blanket. Her hands moved quickly, cutting away frozen fabric, packing the wound with clean cloth, then securing it with a tight wrap. Shadow sniffed at Clara's sleeve, recognizing her scent from the neighborhood. She gave him a quick pat, murmuring, "Watch for me." He settled beside Abigail, eyes scanning the tree line. "We need to get him to the road," Clara said. "Ambulance can't reach this deep into the woods." She directed the twins to help lift Marcus's shoulders while she supported his legs. Even unconscious, he was heavy, his boots dragging furrows through the snow. Abigail's arms burned, but she gritted her teeth, following Clara's steady pace. Shadow trotted ahead, checking the way, occasionally glancing back to be sure they were still moving. The cold pressed in harder as they went, the light dimming under the thickening snow. Abigail glanced over her shoulder more than once, half expecting to see the black-coated man again, but the path behind them stayed empty. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots and Marcus's labored breathing. Finally, the trees thinned, and the faint line of the road appeared ahead. Clara eased Marcus down onto a dry patch of snow under a bare elm. She pulled a flare from her bag and struck it. Red light and a hiss filled the air, a beacon in the falling white. Minutes later, the muffled wail of a siren wound through the trees, growing louder until headlights cut across the snow and an ambulance pulled up along the road. Two paramedics jumped out, both bundled in navy jackets with reflective stripes. They moved Marcus onto a stretcher, checking his pulse and securing the bandages Clara had placed. One of them, a young man with dark hair and frost at his eyebrows, asked, "Family?" Clara shook her head. "No, but I'll ride with him." She turned to the girls. "You two straight home. I'll check in later." Shadow stepped close to Abigail, pressing his shoulder against her hip as the ambulance doors closed. The siren's wail rose again, carrying Marcus Reed toward a different kind of battle. Abigail stood in the snow, watching the lights disappear into the white, the echo of his whispered warning. "Don't trust Victor Hale," settling like a stone in her mind. The antiseptic tang of the hospital clung to every breath Marcus Reed took as he opened his eyes to a muted light filtering through a thin curtain. He lay in a narrow bed, one side of his torso wrapped tight under layers of gauze, each shallow inhale reminding him that pain was still his closest companion. Clara Bennett sat in a chair near the bed, posture straight despite the long hours she had spent at his side. Her silver hair, pinned up beneath a knitted cap, cast soft shadows over her lined face. She had always been composed, but her eyes today held a sharper edge, as if she was keeping one ear tuned for danger. "You're awake," Clara said, leaning forward, "but don't talk too much. You lost more blood than I care to count." Marcus swallowed and worked moisture into his throat. "I don't have time to rest, Clara. Victor Hale, he knows I was close to exposing him. He won't let me live, and he won't let those girls live if he thinks they saw his man in the woods." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "The twins?" Marcus nodded, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "They were there. They saw him, hooded coat, standing just far enough back. That's not chance, it's surveillance. Hale's been running weapons through these back roads, masking them as farm equipment shipments. I tracked payments, military records wiped clean, land purchases in dummy names. I had proof. It was ready to go to the state investigator. Then he sent them after me." His jaw clenched. They wanted me dead in the snow. Clara knew Marcus's history, how he had once refused to evacuate under fire, how he stayed behind to ensure civilians got out. It made sense he would risk his life now, even injured for two children he had just met. She set her mug down and leaned closer. Then we keep them safe, no matter what. Elsewhere in Frosthaven, Agnes Holloway was arranging her ledger with unusual care, her mouth set in a thin, unreadable smile. She had company today. Victor Hale himself. He was a man in his early 50s, built like he'd once been athletic but now relied on tailored coats to maintain an air of authority. His dark hair, silvered at the temples, was combed back in precise lines, and his eyes had the cold focus of someone used to giving orders no one refused. He stood in Agnes's small kitchen as if it were a boardroom, a leather glove tapping idly against the table. "The arrangement is simple," Victor said, his voice calm but edged with finality. "You'll take the girls to Brimfield. A contact there will see to them. You'll have enough cash to make the trip worthwhile, and you'll forget they ever existed in your home." Agnes's thin fingers smoothed over the envelope he had set before her. She thought of her bills, the creeping rise in fuel costs, the ledger columns that never quite balanced. She told herself this was just another transaction, like any other decision she had made to keep her own life from sliding under. "I'll need to pack their thing," she said, not meeting his gaze. Victor smiled faintly, the kind that never reached his eyes. "Just make sure they're gone before anyone asks questions." That evening, the air around the house felt heavier than usual. Shadow paced near the back door, his tail held low but rigid, head tilted toward the dark tree line. His nose twitched as he caught something foreign on the wind, a scent that didn't belong. The low growl started deep in his chest, building until it burst into sharp, warning barks aimed at the cluster of trees beyond the fence. Abigail, seated at the small table with Amelia, looked up immediately. "What is it, boy?" she asked, moving to the door. Agnes's voice cut across the room. "It's nothing. He probably smelled a fox. Sit down and finish your bread." But Shadow didn't settle. He planted himself between the door and the girls, eyes locked on the same patch of trees, barking again with an urgency that made Amelia's stomach tighten. She reached for her sister's hand under the table. Later, Clara arrived under the pretext of dropping off a jar of broth. She found the girls in the kitchen, their voices subdued. When Agnes went to the pantry, Clara lowered her voice and slipped something small and metal into Abigail's palm, a polished brass dog whistle on a thin leather cord. "If you're ever in trouble," Clara whispered, "blow this as hard as you can. Shadow will find you. It's tuned to his training. He'll come no matter what." Abigail nodded, curling her fingers around the whistle, the weight of it pressing into her skin like a promise. Amelia watched, her eyes wide, sensing the importance without needing all the words. As Clara left, she caught sight of a shadow at the far corner of the property, a man-shaped stillness, half hidden by the trees. She didn't stop walking, didn't let her gaze linger, but her mind noted every detail. The way the figure seemed to pivot slightly, tracking her movement, the faint gleam of something metallic near his hand. She kept going, her boots crunching in the snow, but her grip tightened on the strap of her bag. Back in the hospital, Marcus convinced a skeptical young nurse to bring him his personal effects. From a worn leather wallet, he slid out a creased photo, a group of soldiers, smiling, the sun glaring off the sand behind them. Two of those men were no longer alive because of Victor Hale's shipments. Marcus stared at the image, letting the memory steal his resolve. In the Holloway house, Agnes locked her ledger away and folded the envelope of cash into her coat pocket. She glanced toward the twins' small attic room, her expression unreadable. In the corner, Shadow lay with his head on his paws, but his eyes never closed, every muscle taut beneath his thick fur. The house had fallen into an unnatural silence that night. Abigail and Amelia lay awake in their attic room. Shadow stretched between them on the floor, his head lifted and ears twitching at every sound from below. Hours earlier, Agnes had moved through the house with a briskness that didn't match her usual measured steps. She had locked the front and back doors, tested each window latch, and brought down 2 worn suitcases from the closet. Her lips were pressed so tightly together they looked like a pale line, and her eyes darted toward the attic stairs more than once, as if measuring how much trouble the girls might cause before morning. Abigail whispered to Amelia, "If we wait, she's going to take us away." Amelia's voice trembled. "Where?" Neither had an answer, but the unspoken truth hung between them. Away from Shadow, away from Frosthaven, away from anyone who might protect them. Shadow shifted closer, his warm breath huffing softly against Abigail's arm, as if sensing the tension. Downstairs, Agnes was packing with the precision of someone fulfilling an agreement, folding clothes into the suitcases, tucking a thick envelope deep inside one. Her coat and boots stood ready by the door. She moved next to the phone, her thin fingers dialing a number from memory. On the other end, Victor Hale's voice was smooth and quiet. "You'll be on the road by sunrise?" Agnes replied in a low voice. "Earlier. They won't have time to tell anyone." Unbeknownst to her, Clara Bennett was in the neighboring house's kitchen, sipping tea with her friend Sarah Mullins, a retired librarian, tall and angular, with sharp cheekbones and a direct gaze that made people either trust her instantly or avoid her altogether. Sarah had spent her career in a small-town library, championing children's reading programs, even when funding cuts threatened to close them. That battle had made her fierce toward bullies and protective of anyone younger or smaller. When Agnes's voice carried faintly through the old shared phone line, Clara froze and gestured for silence. They both listened to the muffled conversation. Agnes naming a back road and a time. Sarah's brow furrowed. She mouthed, "She's taking them tonight." Clara's jaw tightened. Upstairs, the twins were quietly pulling on sweaters and boots. Abigail slipped the brass dog whistle from her pocket and tied it securely around her neck, tucking it under her sweater. Shadow paced in a tight circle, tail stiff, picking up the scent of movement outside. Abigail eased the attic door open. Each step down the narrow stairs was measured, her breath caught in her throat. In the kitchen, she saw the faint yellow glow of the lamp spilling under the doorway to the living room, where Agnes worked. She motioned to Amelia to keep low as they crept toward the back door. Just as Abigail's fingers brushed the wooden wedge that held the door shut, Agnes's voice cut through the quiet. "And where do you think you're going?" Her thin frame filled the doorway, the lamplight sharpening the hollows in her face. The suitcases sat behind her, packed and ready. "You try to run, and you'll regret it," she said coldly, stepping forward. Before she could close the distance, a soft thud came from the back porch. The door swung open, and a tall figure filled the frame. Marcus Reed. He leaned heavily against the jamb, his coat unzipped to reveal the thick bandage under his shirt. His face was pale, but his eyes locked on the twins with urgency. "Run!" he rasped, his breath wheezing but his voice leaving no room for argument. Shadow bolted forward first, pushing between the girls to clear the way. Abigail grabbed Amelia's hand, and they shot past Marcus into the cold air outside. Behind them, Agnes's shout turned into a curse, the scrape of her boots following. Marcus pulled the door shut behind him and staggered after the girls, his breath catching in shallow bursts. They crossed the yard quickly, boots crunching, until a shadow detached itself from the tree line ahead. The hooded man in the black coat stepped into their path, his stance wide, blocking the way. His gloved hand moved slightly, and though the light was dim, Abigail thought she saw the dull gleam of metal. Shadow erupted into a furious bark, lowering his head and charging forward, teeth bared. The man jerked back instinctively, bringing up his arm to shield himself as the dog's weight slammed into him. "Go!" Marcus barked, pushing the girls toward the slope beyond the yard. They scrambled down the incline, snow slipping under their boots. Marcus followed, gripping the trunk of a small pine to steady himself, his breath harsh. From the road beyond the hill came the low rumble of an engine. Headlights flickered briefly through the trees, growing brighter. On the porch behind them, Agnes had grabbed the phone again, dialing with quick, stabbing presses. "They're heading toward the south slope," she hissed into the receiver. "You'd better be there." She didn't see Clara standing at the edge of the neighbor's porch listening. Clara's hand tightened on Sarah Mullins' arm. "We need to move," Clara said, her voice low but steady. Sarah nodded, already heading for the small pickup she kept for runs into town. Down on the slope, the twins stumbled, Marcus catching Amelia before she fell headlong. The lights from the approaching vehicle danced between the tree trunks, the sound of tires crunching snow growing louder. Marcus pressed the twins against the lee of a fallen log, Shadow returning to them, chest heaving but eyes still locked uphill where the hooded man now stood, unmoving, as if recalculating his approach. "Keep moving," Marcus said, pushing them toward the thin trail that led farther down. The engine sound shifted. The vehicle was turning onto the same path, slower now. Somewhere above, Agnes's voice carried again, muffled by distance, but the tone was unmistakable, sharp and urgent. Clara and Sarah, having cut across the neighbor's property, moved quickly toward the sound, hoping to intercept before the black-coated man or whoever was in that truck reached the children. Marcus could hear the crunch of boots before he saw them. 4 figures fanning out across the narrow trail that cut along the forest's edge. Victor Hale led the pack, his tailored black coat buttoned high, the fur-lined collar framing a face that was equal parts charm and menace. His hair was dark, slicked back in a way that glistened under the faint glow of the approaching headlights. His eyes were sharp, scanning the slope where Marcus stood shielding Abigail and Amelia. Victor moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent years buying his way out of trouble, his gloved hands relaxed but his presence radiating threat. Behind him, 2 burly men in heavy jackets flanked a wiry third with a jagged scar down his neck, each carrying the kind of posture that spoke of backroom deals and quick violence. "Marcus Reed," Victor's voice was smooth, almost amused. "You've been a persistent inconvenience. Hand over the girls and maybe I'll let you keep breathing." Shadow stepped forward, hackles raised, his deep growl vibrating in the cold air. Abigail's grip on Marcus's coat tightened. Amelia pressed her face against his side, eyes locked on Victor's men. Marcus steadied his stance despite the ache in his injured ribs. "You'll have to go through me," he said, low but firm. Victor chuckled, glancing at his men. "Oh, we will." He took a deliberate step forward, but before the first man could close the distance, a sharp voice rang out from the darkness. "Police! Drop your weapons!" Clara Bennett emerged from the trees, her breath visible in short bursts, a flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Beside her, Sarah Mullins held a sturdy oak walking stick like she'd been born with it. But more importantly, 3 uniformed officers followed, weapons drawn, their reflective patches glinting under the lights. Victor's confident smile faltered, replaced by calculation. "This is a misunderstanding," he began, his voice slipping into false charm. But one officer was already securing his wrists in steel cuffs. The burly men hesitated, then dropped to their knees as ordered. The scarred man tried to bolt toward the slope, but Shadow lunged, blocking his path with a bark so fierce it made the man freeze. Marcus felt the girls relax fractionally against him as Clara stepped closer. "You picked the wrong town, Victor," she said, her tone edged with satisfaction. A second pair of cuffs clicked shut, not around Victor's men this time, but around Agnes. She stood at the trail's edge, her suitcase beside her, eyes darting wildly. One of the officers, a solidly built man named Officer Dunn, announced the charges: accepting bribes, endangerment, and child abuse. Agnes's lips pressed thin, but she said nothing. Her shoulders slumped as they led her toward the waiting cruiser. Victor, still in the grip of 2 officers, shot Marcus a look that promised unfinished business. But Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he dropped to one knee, pulling Abigail and Amelia into his arms. Shadow pressed close, his nose bumping Marcus's shoulder. "I'm here," Marcus murmured, his voice rough. "I'm not going anywhere." The girls clung tighter, Shadow's warm breath mingling with theirs. Clara stood a step back, watching them with a softness that made her eyes shine. The next year in Frosthaven was different. The shadow of that night had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of daily life. Marcus officially adopted Abigail and Amelia, the papers signed in the small courthouse where Clara served as witness. They kept Shadow, who adapted seamlessly to his new role as both family protector and unofficial town greeter. Clara and Marcus pooled their savings to reopen the old bakery on Main Street, renaming it Frosthaven Hearth. The space was more than a bakery. It was half cafe, half reading nook, with shelves of books along one wall and the warm scent of cinnamon and bread drifting out to the street. Shadow quickly became a favorite among the regulars. Children would slip him pieces of biscuit under the tables, and elderly patrons often paused on their way in just to scratch behind his ears. He took his post by the front door every morning, a quiet sentinel, tail wagging slowly as customers came and went. For Abigail and Amelia, the bakery was a haven. They helped behind the counter, practiced reading at the little library corner, and never had to look over their shoulders again. On the center table, framed in dark wood, sat a photograph taken the first winter after the rescue. The twins in matching pink sweaters, cheeks rosy, standing between Marcus and Shadow. Snow fell in soft flakes around them, and for once, the smiles on their faces weren't guarded. They were wide, unrestrained, and utterly free. In the end, Frosthaven was no longer just a place on a map. It was a promise kept. Marcus had faced the storm, not with weapons or force, but with the unshakable choice to protect those who could not protect themselves. Abigail and Amelia learned that family isn't always the one you're born into, but the one that stands beside you when the world turns cold. And Shadow proved once again that loyalty can come with four paws and a heartbeat strong enough to guard a home. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. What does family mean to you? Your voice matters, and I would love to hear it. If you enjoyed this journey, please like this video and follow the channel so we can keep bringing you more stories of courage, love, and second chances.